Hi, I am Lee from Hanyang University in South Korea. I'm going to talk about combining the top-down propagation and bottom-up enumeration for inductive program synthesis. Inductive program synthesis, also known as programming by example, aims at generating a program in a domain-specific language from input-output examples. Since input-output examples are readily available and appealing to end users, this technology has gained increasing academic and industrial attention. The flash fill feature of Microsoft Excel, which automates spreadsheet programming, is the most well-known example. This technology has been applied to not only end-user programming, but also a wide range of problems such as super-optimization, program repair, among many others. There's a dichotomy in inductive program synthesis. General-purpose synthesis, which works for arbitrary user-provided DSLs, and domain-specific synthesis that is only applicable for specific kinds of DSLs. General-purpose synthesizers were increased by a standard formulation, syntax-guided synthesis, shortly SyGuS, that has established various benchmarks through annual competitions. Using SyGuS, the user can freely describe a grammar that defines a target DSL along with semantic constraints on the desired program. Because a target DSL cannot be fixed in advance, they often adopt a general search strategy such as bottom-up enumeration, which does not require any domain knowledge. However, as synthesis is a hard search problem, it is hard to scale without using domain knowledge. On the other hand, domain-specific synthesizers do not take a user-provided DSL, but only take input-output constraints from the user. Over a fixed underlying DSL, a domain-specific strategy such as top-down propagation is often used. They are efficient enough for industrialization so that commercial products such as Excel, PowerShell, and Visual Studio are equipped with domain-specific synthesizers. However, the major downside is limited applicability. Only specific kinds of DSLs can be targeted. Our main question is this: can we synergistically combine the two approaches to obtain the best of the two worlds? In other words, can you obtain a general-purpose synthesizer to which the user can provide an arbitrary DSL while achieving performance comparable to domain-specific ones? We summarize the main contributions of our work as follows. We propose a general approach to accelerate general-purpose inductive synthesis by synergistically combining two most well-known general-purpose and domain-specific strategies. We have applied the approach to the SyGuS standard formulation, thereby targeting a broad class of synthesis tasks. Lastly, we implemented our approach on top of a tool called Duet, which is publicly available. Let me first describe the overall architecture of our algorithm, which comprises two parts, generator and composer. The generator first takes a synthesis specification along with an integer n and enumerates expressions which we call components whose size is smaller than or equal to n. These enumerated expressions are provided to the composer, which then tries to construct a solution from the components. The desired program may not be synthesized if the given set of components is insufficient. Then we augment the component pool by adding larger expressions and attempt to construct a solution again. This process is repeated until a solution is found. In the rest of the talk, I will first describe our approach and previous methods on an example synthesis problem formulated using SyGuS, and I will show you the evaluation result. Let's suppose we want to synthesize a function f that takes a string of a phone number denoted x and outputs another string in a different format. The syntactic specification is provided as this context-free grammar, where S is the start and non-terminal symbol. We consider programs that can contain constant strings plus, space, hyphen, and dot, and can perform string concatenation, substring extraction, int to string conversion, and string replacement operation that returns a new string where the first occurrence of the match string in the original string is replaced by the replacement string. The semantic specification follows the program by example paradigm and comprises input-output examples given as this logical formula. We want to remove a leading space and a plus symbol, replacing a dot in the middle with a hyphen and adding a dot at the end. The smallest solution to this problem is as follows. The size of the solution in AST nodes is 12. On this example problem, I will describe how existing strategies and our strategy work. Bottom-up enumeration, which is the general purpose strategy, is applicable to this problem, but inefficient. Top-down propagation, which is the domain-specific strategy, is not even applicable. Our algorithm can efficiently solve this problem. The existing bottom-up enumerative search searches for the solution by enumerating programs generated by the given grammar in order of increasing size. Small expressions are put together to construct larger expressions. During the enumeration, they prune the search space using observational equivalence with respect to a given set of input-output examples. For example, two programs, 2 minus 1 and integer 1, generate the same output. Only the smaller expression 1 is maintained and used for constructing larger candidates. While this simple strategy is generally applicable for almost all kinds of synthesis problems, it often does not scale. Therefore, bottom-up enumeration is usually used for finding small programs and not effective in this case where the solution in AST is 12, which is not that small. Top-down propagation adopted by Flashfield recursively decompose a given synthesis problem into multiple subproblems and combine their solutions. In particular, it keeps answering this kind of questions. After hypothetically deciding on overall structure of the solution, for example, f of E1 through Ek, what are the input-output examples that should be satisfied by unknown subexpressions E1 through Ek? Answering this question needs to invert f, which means generating possible inputs of f that lead to the desired output O. For example, given the desired output string USA, the inverse function of concatenation would generate two pairs of possible inputs of concatenation, USA and USA. Let's call such a set of possible inputs an inverse set. For the given input-output example, suppose we are based on hypothesis that the top-level operator of the solution is string concatenation. Our hypothesis is just the right-hand side of a production rule in the grammar. The inverse function of concatenation generates possible inputs that lead to the desired output as follows. Using the inverse set generated by the inverse function, subproblems of synthesizing argument expressions of concatenation are deduced as follows. Each newly deduced problem is recursively decomposed into multiple subproblems until no problems are left unsolved. For example, the problem of finding an expression that outputs string 1 for the given input is reduced to the problem of finding a program that outputs integer 1, assuming the top-level operator is the integer to string conversion. And this subproblem is not further decomposed since it is trivially solvable by using a singleton expression integer 1. On the other hand, the other subproblems are further decomposed because they are not trivially solvable. In this manner, for each input-output example, top-down propagation of input-output example is performed, and a set of all programs consistent with each individual example is derived and stored in a space-efficient data structure. To construct a set of programs consistent with multiple input-output examples, an intersection on set of programs that are consistent with individual examples should be computed. This strategy is goal-directed in the sense that only subproblems related to the final goal are deduced, and very efficient through divide and conquer. However, this method does not scale well when a large number of input-output examples are provided because of the set intersection. And most importantly, this strategy is not always applicable. Then when is it inapplicable? Top-down propagation is not applicable when there are infinitely many possible inputs that can result in a desired output. For example, suppose we want to deduce subproblems for arguments based on a hypothesis of substring. For this given input-output example, the desired output of the first argument would be any string containing the desired output string O in this case. The number of possible such strings is infinite, and we cannot deduce infinitely many subproblems. Let us call such arguments of infinite preimages unconstrained arguments. Because the grammar for the example SyGuS problem is too general, the previous top-down propagation is not even applicable due to the unconstrained argument problem. The previous mitigation to this problem is restricting a grammar for an underlying DSL. If the grammar only allows the substring operator to take input example, preventing the other operators from being nested, then this syntactic restriction allows deducing two missing specified indices for given specification by identifying the starting and ending positions of the desired output in the input example. For example, given a problem of finding a program consistent with this input-output example, then by fixing the first argument to be x, we can deduce proper input-output examples for the other second and the third argument expressions. In general, this approach requires a great deal of domain expertise to achieve a balanced expressivity of the underlying DSL. In other words, the DSL should be expressive enough for practical uses while being restricted enough to enable top-down propagation. That is why top-down propagation is not generally applicable. Our key observation to overcome this limitation of the previous top-down propagation is as follows. While bottom-up enumeration is not scalable enough to find a large solution, it can at least quickly identify small but important subexpressions of a solution. For example, a small subexpression concat x and dot can be put in the place of the unconstrained argument, thereby limiting possible values for the other arguments. Based on this observation, we devise a variant of top-down propagation. Whenever we encounter an unconstrained argument, of which inverse set is infinite, we set each value space to be a subset of output of component expressions generated by bottom of enumeration. Or sometimes we use values similar to output of components in order to generate subproblems that can be eventually solved by using a current set of components. We describe our algorithm in more detail. We first generate component expressions of a certain size. Suppose the initial component size is given 1. Then the generator would generate the following set C of size 1 expressions. Next, we perform top-down propagation with the components. Based on the hypothesis of substring, we search for a component that produces string containing the desired output 1 and 2. If we can find such a component, by fixing the first argument to be the component, we will be able to infer examples for the other arguments by identifying proper starting and ending positions of substrings. Here, one difference between our method and the previous top-down propagation is that our inverse functions maintain a set of multiple input-output examples and perform simultaneous decomposition on the examples. In contrast, the previous top-down propagation performs decomposition for each individual example. This simultaneous decomposition obviates the need for set intersection, thereby scaling well on the number of input-output examples. After searching for a component that produces strings containing the desired output 1 and 2, we conclude there is no such component in C. We reject the hypothesis and move on to other hypotheses. At this point, you may be concerned about the possibility of missing solutions. Indeed, we may miss a solution whose time-level operator is a substring at this iteration because the inverse set derived from the component pool C does not contain the output of all possible argument expressions. For example, this expression is such a solution. To find this solution, we should have used components of size 9, but we just used size 1 component. However, the overall algorithm does not compromise the search completeness. Though we could not find this solution at this time, we will eventually find it by continuously increasing the component size. Because we failed to construct a solution out of the component, we add more components. Suppose we've added components whose size are smaller than or equal to 3. Suppose we are now based on the hypothesis of string replacement, and we attempt to generate examples on the argument expressions. Similarly to the previous case of substring, there are infinitely many possible values for the arguments, and we may confine the inverse set for the first argument to be the set of outputs of components, similarly to what we have done for the hypothesis of substring. However, to find the solution in this manner, we would need this subexpression of the solution, which is still too large to be generated by the component generator. So we need a more efficient manner. To address this problem, we guide the decomposition to generate subproblems that can be eventually solved with the current set C of small expressions. We have devised an effective inverse function operator for string replacement. For the purpose of finding a small solution, we search for an expression in C which produces strings similar to 1 and 2 respectively, so that a minimal number of string replacement operations may result in the desired output examples. The similarity is defined by string edit distance. For each component, we compute the edited distance between each output and the desired output O1 and O2, and find out concat of xn dot produces strings close to the output examples. We compute an alignment of the component output and desired output. An alignment is a pair of strings obtained by arranging two strings to identify regions of similarity, as depicted in these figures. Epsilon denotes the empty word, and the highlighted in color denote mismatched characters. From the alignment, we obtain desired output of the argument expressions. The highlighted in blue represent the desired output for the first argument expression, and the highlighted in red represent the desired output for the second argument expression, and the green represent the desired output for the last argument expression. The subproblems deduced for the second and the last argument are easily observable with singleton components, hyphen, and dot. So we continue decomposing the subproblem for the first argument. Suppose now we are based on the hypothesis of substring to solve this subproblem. We find the component concat xn dot produces strings containing the desired output. The constraint on the second argument is to produce the starting position of the desired output, which is 2. And the constraint on the last argument is to produce the length of the desired output strings, which is 6 and 8. The constraint on the second argument is easily solvable with a singleton expression, integer 2. To solve the subproblem for the last argument, we use a hypothesis that the solution would be of the form I1 minus I2. Again, there are infinitely many combinations of such that I1 minus I2 evaluates to 6 and 8 on the first and second input examples respectively. We search for a component that produces integers greater than 6 and 8, which is the length of x. By fixing I1 to be length of x, I2 is determined to be 1 accordingly. And these two subproblems are easily solvable by using the component length of x and 1. Because no subproblems are left unsolved, the solution is found. We have devised inverse functions not only for the string domains, but also for the other domains supported in the SyGuS specification language, such as fixed width bit vector, linear integer arithmetic, and set. The detailed definitions can be found in the paper. We recognize two types in the inverse functions we have defined. One type of inverse functions deduces input-output examples not directly satisfied by a component. The inverse function for replace falls into this category. This type of inverse function incurs consecutive problem decompositions. The other type of inverse function deduces input-output examples that can be directly satisfied by a component, thereby incurring a single deductive step. Though we have defined inverse functions for various operators supported in the SyGuS language, there are cases where cost-effective inverse functions cannot be defined. If no particular domain knowledge of an underlying operator is exploitable, or computing inverse set is quite expensive, we used something we call the universal inverse function. Suppose an input-output example specification is given on a non-terminal n, which is associated with this production rule. Then the universal inverse function computes the following inverse set. It essentially enumerates all possible combinations of component expressions that can result in the given desired output. Now we present evaluation results. We have evaluated our tool Duet on over 1,500 synthesis tasks collected from the SyGuS competition benchmarks and our previous work of synthesis-based optimization. We compare our tool to EU Solver and SyGuS4, which are the winners of past SyGuS competitions, and Euphony, which is a statistical model-guided synthesizer. We chose synthesis tasks from 3 different application domains. The string benchmarks correspond to common string manipulation tasks faced by spreadsheet users. The bit vector benchmarks are for finding bit manipulating programs from input-output examples, and the circuit benchmarks concern transforming given circuits into better ones in terms of performance or security. We first compare Duet to EU Solver and SyGuS4. Duet solved more problems than the others by solving about 94% of all the problems, whereas EU Solver and SyGuS4 could solve only 82% and 64% respectively. Duet outperforms the others also in terms of synthesis time. Duet is the fastest solver in the vast majority of the solved problems. Here are more detailed results. Each plot shows the number of problems solved within a certain amount of cumulative time by the 3 solvers for each domain. Blue lines represent performance of Duet. The closer to x-axis, the better. Duet is the first tool that solves all the problems in the string domain, and it could solve 40% of problems within only 1 second each, and 90% of problems within 1 minute each. Next, we compare Duet with Euphony, which learns statistical models from easily obtainable solutions and use them to guide the search. For each domain, we use all problems that EU Solver could solve within 10 minutes each as the training set, and we train the model for that domain using the solutions found by EU Solver. The testing set comprises the other remaining 467 problems. In terms of the overall number of solved problems, Duet is better than Euphony. So we conclude Duet solves harder synthesis problems more quickly compared to the state-of-the-art tools in diverse domains. And next, this figure shows the frequency distribution of benchmarks according to the maximum size of components when Duet finds a solution. Overall, the maximum size of components range from 1 to 12 with an average of 4. Out of solved 1,443 problems in all the domains, 92% of problems could be solved with component expressions of size less than or equal to 7. Such small expressions can be quickly explored by the bottom of enumeration in practice. This indicates that Duet could compose solutions from small expressions. If you are interested in more details, please refer to our paper. Thank you.